My name is Mark Nordenberg, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this special program that is part of a Governing in Crisis series co-sponsored by the University of Pittsburgh's Institute of Politics and its Dick Thornburg Forum for Law and Public Policy. For 30 years, the Institute has provided a nonpartisan forum for the consideration of issues of importance to the region. The Dick Thornburg Forum, building on Governor Thornburg's own inspiring example, has made good governance practices a priority. It is a real honor to have the chance to speak with the Honorable Kim Berkeley Clark, the President Judge of the 5th Judicial District of Pennsylvania, a district that encompasses Allegheny County and, of course, includes Pittsburgh. Judge Clark is a graduate of Duquesne University's School of Law, and earlier in her career spent 16 years as a prosecutor, handling more than 150 jury trials, including prosecutions for homicide, sexual assault, and child abuse. She was appointed to the bench following a merit selection process by then Governor Tom Ridge in 1999. She was elected to a full term that same year and since has been retained twice. President Judge Clark's record of service on the judiciary has been nothing short of extraordinary. The lists of her many important forms of recognition and of the first she has achieved are far too numerous to discuss, but let me quickly offer some examples. She is the first African American to serve as President Judge of our Court of Common Pleas. Before that, she was the first African American to lead a division of our court as administrative judge of its family division. She also was the first sitting judge and the first African American woman to serve as president of the Allegheny County Bar Association. She has been honored as a champion of hope and healing, a woman of influence, a Black history and diversity hero, a friend of adoption, a drum major of justice, a friend of children, and a woman of legacy. She also has been honored for her community advocacy and for her overall leadership. In 2017, at a dinner hosted by Chief Justice John Roberts of the United States Supreme Court, Judge Clark received an award named after another U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice, the William H. Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence. This is the highest honor bestowed upon a state court judge by the National Center for State Courts. In presenting the award, the president of that organization described Judge Clark as a person who leads by example, who is committed to helping families, and whose work has dramatically improved the lives not only of those who have entered her courtroom, but of thousands of other families. President Judge Clark, a key to your receipt of the Rehnquist Award and many of your other well-deserved honors is the record that you built in leading efforts to improve Allegheny County's juvenile justice system. At the heart of those successes are your determined efforts to create what you have called a trauma-informed courthouse. What does that mean?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for the introduction. So a trauma-informed courthouse goes sort of hand in hand with the concepts of procedural justice, but it does take into account that often the reasons that persons are in courtrooms in courthouses, involved in court proceedings are very personal, particularly in the family division where I sit. When you think about the reasons that people come to the family division, they're coming because their marriage is dissolving, which is very traumatic and personal. They're fighting for custody of their children. They're seeking an order for protection from abuse. They're fighting over child support. On the juvenile side, children, youth, and families has become involved in their lives, and maybe the children have been removed and placed in foster care, which is traumatic for both the children and both the parents. Some of those children have been victims of abuse. Most of them are victims of neglect. We terminate parental rights in our division. Children have been charged with crimes, and victims of crimes come into our courthouse. So it's very traumatic. And then coupled with the presenting reason that someone is in court, many of the people that enter our courthouses have histories filled with traumatic events that affects their ability to function well in the court setting, to convey their stories to the court, and to understand what the process is. And it shapes their opinions as to whether the system has been fair. So when we look at that, when we look at how procedural justice works, we know that procedural justice is about transparency and openness. It's about fairness. It's about impartiality. And I think most importantly, it's about having a voice. People coming into the courthouses need to believe they have a voice. And I've coupled that with choices also. Sometimes we can give people choices as to what the outcome could be in their cases. And studies have shown, and data has shown, that when courts operate under procedural justice, when they perceive that the system is fair, when they believe that they've had a voice and been heard, and when they understand what has happened, the judge has explained to them what has happened, they are more likely to comply with orders of court. They're more likely to be successful outcomes in cases because they're more invested in it, they understand it. And sometimes it's not about the ultimate result, it's about how you get there, the process. And so there's a lot of things that have to be taken into account. One's background, things like cultural competence, understanding the history and ethnicity and traditions and rituals of families and cultures, how that plays in a part in how they live their lives and how they make their decisions. Using evidence-based tools such as motivational interviewing to get to sort of the truth, to get the information that a judge needs to make an informed decision in the case, and making sure that everyone that comes into the courtroom is treated with dignity and respect. There should never be any exception to that rule.
Well, so even in a large and complex court system, or maybe particularly in a large and complex court system, you can never lose sight of the individual, and you can never act without extending dignity and respect.
That's correct. That's correct.
And the system you lead is large and complex. You've got close to 50 independently elected common pleas judges who are spread across 4 divisions. You've got approximately the same number of independently elected district magistrate judges who are scattered geographically throughout the county. You've got a growing number of specialized courts. You've got other functions like adult and juvenile probation and a range of pretrial processes. When all is said and done, you've got 1,300 employees. Managing such a system would be challenging under the best of circumstances, but the last few months have been anything but the best of circumstances. You had to deal with COVID-19. That resulted, I know, in a 28-page order bearing your signature regarding good health practices and the use of advanced communications technology to conduct proceedings remotely when that was possible. How did all that go? Not only from the perspective of those who are professionals within the court, but from the perspective of those who had business before the court.
So surprisingly, it has gone very well. I said at the outset we should expect the worst, and then everything will be okay, because anything that's better than the worst, we're doing fine. I would just say this. So this was a huge collaborative effort. One of the things that I think is certainly a blessing to me is I have 4 excellent administrative judges who administrate the 4 divisions, and I have an outstanding district court administrator and administrative team, which includes, of course, the district court administrator, our IT person, and the deputy administrator who oversees the magisterial district judges courts. So it was a very good process, I think, that we had coming together. We initially asked, my court administrator and I worked on sort of the general things that would be court-wide, but we asked the administrative judges and the division administrators to kind of flesh out what they wanted to happen with their divisions and the best way to do it. Our administrator for the MDJs did the same thing, and then we kind of put it all together and tweaked it. We talked about it. It takes a long time to do it, but because there's a lot of going back and forth. But it worked pretty well. And so once we got the first one under our belt, as we made amendments and changed things, the process was a little bit easier. But there's just a lot of details that have to go into it. And if you go on the website, you can see that there have been amendments, because there's one little thing that, you know, somebody had a question about. So we needed to issue a clarifying order to make sure that it was clear what we meant. So initially, of course, the courts were closed. They were not open to the public, with the exception of, we did keep municipal court open so that people could come in and file for protection from abuse, because that's sort of a walk-in thing. There was no way that we could just have that totally remotely. Part of it was remote. The hearing part was remote, but we had a process where someone could come in. We chose the municipal courts building because it was the safest place to have it, would be the safest place for staff, because they would be around behind glass and they would not have to have any physical contact with any person coming in. And we also used that building for the housing court emergencies, so people could walk in and deal with the housing court emergencies. The judges, Judge Mulligan heard the temporary PFA hearings, and Judge Hertzberg heard the housing court hearings. They were at home on a Polycom system and were able to conduct the hearings that way. I think we were very fortunate in our county, and sometimes you don't realize what you have until you see what other people don't have. One of the things that we have is our own IT department and IT system, and many of the other courts across Pennsylvania are tied into their county's IT system. And we have a very talented IT team who can do so many things. It's just amazing. And so they were able in short order to get employees working at home in preparation for the judicial emergency. We had people bring in their laptops and iPads so that we could load things on them. But for people that needed to work at home and didn't have them, we gave them the equipment they needed to do that. We made sure people had Wi-Fi and hotspots and the things that they needed. And we are now pretty much hearing, well, the family division is hearing pretty much everything remotely. Civil division is hearing most things. Criminal court is hearing some things. It's more of a hybrid there, and orphans court as well. Initially, everything was remotely, but we have returned some things. We have reopened court facilities to the public, but we still are trying to hear as many things at home to reduce the numbers of people in the courthouses and court facilities.
There is another dimension of the pandemic that you and your team needed to deal with, and that was appropriately protecting the people who are incarcerated in the county jail. Some of them have not been convicted of anything. Those who have been convicted are serving short sentences. Many of them would, or I shouldn't say many, we'll let that come from your answer, but at least some of them would be of low risk to the community if released, but high risk at contracting COVID-19 if kept in the close confines of the county jail. So how did you and your team deal with that?
So I will have to say this was probably one of the best examples of collaboration that I've ever dealt with. And people that know me for many years, sort of my mantra has been collaboration rocks, because none of us can do things by ourselves. I mean, it's just impossible. And when you're in a system, you are dependent upon other people to help you. I get to do my work because somebody has done a lot of things in advance of the court hearing to make that happen. Scheduling, filing things, making sure that we have legal pads and pens, all of those things are in place before I ever take the bench. And so someone has made this happen. So this was a collaborative effort with the Allegheny County Jail, the county executive, the district attorney, the public defender, and the court. And so we decided that we needed to get as many people out of the jail that could safely be released to the community in some form or fashion. So we wanted to make sure that the community was safe. There's a huge obligation by the court and certainly by the district attorney's office to ensure that the community is safe. But we wanted to also ensure that the citizens, our citizens that are temporarily residing in the county jail, are also safe. And the safest way to do that was to reduce the population. It's a big jail. I think it is the largest single county jail or prison in Pennsylvania. Philadelphia probably has more prisoners, but they have more than one facility. We have one facility and it's very large. So the first thing we did was the jail provided us with a list of those inmates that they felt were most vulnerable or most at risk should they contract COVID-19, those that had pre-existing medical conditions or because of age or otherwise would put them at high risk. So we started with that group to see who in that group we could let out. And then once we went through that group, we also then went with, looked at those who were low or moderate risk to reoffend, those that were were in for sort of minor charges. We tackled those lists, and then we moved to those who might be detained for a probation violation, and those had to really be handled by the individual judges on their cases. But we had a good team of people, our criminal division administrator, Tom McCaffrey, and the administrator for pretrial services, Janice Dean. They worked very hard along with their staff. It was almost a 24/7 operation around the clock to try to get the information so that we could let people out. The public defender's office filed many motions to have bail reduced, or so that every day Judge Manning heard the bail hearings, and so people were released through that mechanism as well. We also made it possible for people to turn themselves in on bench warrants without physically coming to the courthouse. They take walk-ins when the courthouse is open every day, but since we weren't allowing people in. We had a telephone mechanism so they could be interviewed over the phone, and warrants could be cleared so those people wouldn't be arrested and put back into the jail. But between March 18th and May 29th, the court issued 1,073 orders to release defendants from the county jail. There were actually others that were released, ones that were released because they had served their sentence. So they were not not released by court order, but because their sentence had expired. And then there are some folks in the county jail that are being detained by other jurisdictions and may have left there because those detainers were lifted, or they were transported back to wherever county or state they needed to go. There are some federal prisoners in the county jail over whom we have no jurisdiction or supervision. So I can't say for sure whether any of those had been released, but the court issued more than 1,000 orders to release inmates from the jail. And the most interesting part is that there hasn't been a serious uptick in violent offenses or rearrest. Sadly, I think there have been a couple of overdose deaths for people that had addiction issues, but we were able to keep the community safe, and that was the important thing.
Well, it was interesting that the American Civil Liberties Union filed for relief under the special King's Bench powers of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, contending that county jails were a source of high risk for not just those who were inside, but for the general public, because if the spread went to staff, from staff, it would go into the general community. And Allegheny County was the only system that was singled out as having a systemic program for dealing with this dimension of the pandemic. So you must have been proud about that. And when the ACLU sought this relief, you had released 500. So you essentially doubled that.
Yes.
I do want to go back and underscore one point you have made, because preserving public safety is so important. And what you're saying is that tracking the experiences with these 1,000 detainees in the county jail who were released, there were no significant problems with people committing violent crimes after release.
That's correct. That's correct.
One factor that may have contributed to your team's successes was the fact that you already were looking at the population of the Allegheny County Jail. America has become known as the incarceration nation, with 5% of the population and 25% of the prisoner population. And we now know that the approach of lock them up and throw away the key hasn't worked very well in terms of the safety of the community or fairness to the individuals. And you have said that you think the experience in reducing the jail's population as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic will provide a better foundation for dealing with the jail population generally over time. What do you mean by that?
I think so. So, you know, we were sort of in crisis mode, and we were able to, I think, you know, release more than 1,000 inmates from the jail without major incident. So why was that? And what can we learn from what we did to keep doing it in the future? So I would say that maybe some of these defendants should not have been in the jail in the first place. Maybe some of them were still struggling over the issues of cash bail, which is still legal, but keeps people in jail that probably should be out and could be out, but for a small amount of money. Lessons to be learned from detaining probationers for technical violations, or even if they have another arrest, if it's sort of not a serious offense, should they be detained? There's sort of a long-term effect that people don't think about necessarily with incarceration. So, I mean, I've heard statements, colleagues in other states and across the Pennsylvania, we're all struggling with this issue of who is in and who is out, the proportionality of minorities and poor people in jail as opposed to others. We're struggling with those. But, you know, I've heard comments along the way that, well, people get detained, but some of them, they're only there 3 or 4 days and that's no big deal. That might not be a big deal for me or for you, Mark, if we got arrested and we had to spend the weekend or even 5 days or a week in jail. We would probably still have our jobs unless it was some offense that was so horrible that we were fired on the spot from our jobs. But we would have a place to live. We have, you know, income. We have bank accounts. We have supports and families and spouses. So we could probably survive 4 or 5 days or even 7 days or longer in jail. But many of the people that I see in the family court on the dependency side, they're struggling in many, many ways because of poverty. We don't talk a lot about poverty, but really when you look at disproportionality in juvenile justice, criminal justice, and child welfare, poverty is actually the biggest common denominator, and then minorities. Virtually everyone that I see almost is poor, and many are really struggling with just the basic things, keeping food on the table. And sometimes there's this decision, you have so many dollars a month, and so are you going to pay your rent or are you going to buy food for your children? So this month I may have decided to buy food for my children, and I may go back and forth with my landlord. I'm always sort of teetering on the edge of him putting me out, evicting me, and now I get arrested for something. Maybe I'm guilty, maybe I'm not guilty, because everyone who gets arrested is not guilty. We know that, but it doesn't matter. I'm in jail because I can't make bail, or and maybe I have been under supervision before and now there's a detainer. So I'm in jail, and my landlord, my community hears I'm in jail. So the landlord says, I'm done. She's always teetering on the edge of eviction anyway. I'm just going to go and change the locks and take all her stuff. So I've lost my housing. Children, Youth, and Families has come and they've taken my children because I'm in jail and I can't parent them. So I've lost my children. And then maybe, you know, my job is, you know, sort of, maybe I'm working under the table, or maybe I'm working at a small local restaurant or something, a private business, and they're not going to keep me. I've missed 4 days. I've missed 5 days. I can't call them and tell them. I'm scared to call them and tell them where I am. I don't want my employer to know I'm in jail. I don't want my coworkers to know that. So I'm just not showing up for work, and now I've lost my job. So even when I get released 4 days later, I have no home to go to. I have to fight to get my children back. I have no income. I've lost all my possessions. And so what is the cost to society for that? I'm not a violent person. I'm not going to hurt anyone. But now you're paying for my children to be in foster care and for all of their needs. I may have to go into a shelter. I may decide I can't deal with this, so I'm just going to go get high or reoffend or whatever. And so the cost is greater to society by having me in even 4 or 5 days, and I've lost everything. And I don't think we think about that.
Allegheny County has been awarded a MacArthur Foundation Safety and Justice Grant. What does that mean?
So we're working with the criminal division to try to, one of the goals is to reduce the population of the county jail. And sort of the irony in this pandemic situation is that we've met and exceeded that goal in short order by virtue of a pandemic and a judicial emergency. But there's other things that they're looking at, sort of the timely processing of cases and reducing continuances, a sort of a more efficient way and a better way to get cases through the court system. You know, sometimes people think the wheels of justice turn awfully slowly, and sometimes they do, and it certainly seems that way to many people. So MacArthur looked at Allegheny County, who has had a pretty good reputation nationally, and it has decided to give us some grant money to work with our county. So one of the things that I know that they have decided to work on in that is to kind of reduce some of the continuances and the time, is to combine the formal arraignment and pretrial conference. They haven't done that yet because of the pandemic, and they're just getting back physically into the courthouses, but that is the plan, to kind of reduce those numbers of days. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. Interestingly, there were a number of procedures that Judge Rangos, who's the administrative judge in criminal division, has put into place for this kind of coming back to the courthouse period, because a lot of the criminal cases got continued because we were not able to do trials of any kind without being in the courthouse. And so now that we're back in, they have the ability to do non-jury trials, and they have started doing guilty pleas through advanced communications technology, but not all cases in criminal court can be heard that way. So we still have to keep the numbers of people entering the courthouses down. So one of the things that she did was she issued an order for the district attorneys and the defense attorneys to have sort of their own pre-hearing or sort of meeting to confer about the case, to make sure that they are actually ready to go on that date. So cases that have to be continued won't be continued on the date of the trial. And it won't be the same thing where everybody just kind of shows up at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the courtroom and then they talk, especially for the lawyers in general trial. So this is actually a much more, I think, efficient way of hearing those, kind of preparing in advance of the trial date as to how the case is going to go, and they're ready. And I understand that it's gotten really rave reviews from the attorneys, because it frees up their time, actually, because when they go to court, they're ready to do their cases. There's none of this waiting around time. So we'll see what happens. So I think there are a lot of things other lessons that we will learn, and some things that we'll be keeping from what we were doing during this judicial emergency.
And of course, we're lucky here too, because we have a local foundation community that has been generous in supporting work in this area, including in particular the Heinz Endowments and the Buell Foundation. For the past several weeks, ever since the tragic killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, we have seen slogans like defund the police. You have a special vantage point because you worked with the police for 16 years as a prosecutor. You've had a special observation point with respect to policing in now more than 2 decades as a judge. And you are a prominent member of the African American community here in Pittsburgh. How have your experiences left you in terms of your feelings about the police and the need for reform of some policing practices?
So I would say this first and foremost. I mean, I would say most police officers are working as police officers and really want to protect and serve their communities. And I have the highest regard for them. Unfortunately, there are some that are on police forces here in Allegheny County, across Pennsylvania and the United States that shouldn't be police officers. I think that there's a lot of training that can happen for police in terms of things like implicit bias and cultural competence, tools to help them de-escalate with words, other than using force or threat of force in order to get people to de-escalate. I think that there needs to be more accountability for when police do things wrong. In other words, there's strong police unions, and certainly I, as a woman from Allegheny County who grew up in a city in a county where unions made life better for many people in terms of better wages and better working conditions, I certainly support that. But I think sometimes when we step back and we don't hold ourselves accountable for our wrong actions, then others around us lose faith. So when police do wrong, we have to hold them accountable. I think it's complicated because the way certain laws are written, the use of force instructions that maybe juries are given sort of prevent that. But when you look at the number of assaults that happen and then the number of arrests actually or charges that are filed in comparison, it's very low. Then when you look at the conviction rate of officers who have been charged, it's extremely low. And it's very disheartening to the community. But I think a couple of things. I mean, obviously, I don't think the police should be defunded in terms of that we shouldn't have a police force. I believe that it is necessary for an orderly society to have a well-trained and competent police force to protect us. But we shouldn't use the police to do things that other people should do. So we need mental health services and mental health beds so that when someone is in a mental health crisis and they are a danger to themselves or others in the present moment, there needs to be a place where they can go quickly. There need to be numbers where family members, the community can call and say, this person is obviously in a mental health crisis, where trained professionals come out and handle that situation without really involving the police. There needs to be a lot of training just in the communication tactics with police. I don't particularly respond well to yelling. That's just not what I think is good for me. And so that whole issue of dignity and respect, it works even in policing. I've seen it. I've seen situations where in our courthouse where deputy sheriffs were able to diffuse a situation without any incident and keep everybody safe just with their words, their appropriate, respectful words to the person who was struggling and flailing and causing a disturbance. It does work. You'd have to be trained to do it. Some people might have sort of that innate ability to do it, but most people have to learn to do it. It's something that you can be trained on and learn. And I think there needs to be sort of a dialogue between police and the community. Somebody needs to kind of facilitate that. So I would say that as a person of color, as an African American, my experiences historically in my community with my family are very different. My experiences with police, or at least my perception of the fairness of police is very different, irrespective of the fact that I worked very closely with police officers for 16 years and respected most of the ones that I worked with, and many of them I consider close friends to this day. But when I went to college at Tennessee State in Nashville, before I went, my parents gave me what I call the Emmett Till speech, which every Black parent gives their child who is going south for the first time to put things in perspective about how you need to behave, how you might be perceived, and what to do if you are encountered by police. Because it's not the same perception that the police are there to help you if you are a Black person, or even if they are, you will be perceived, your actions will be judged very differently because you are a person of color. And that's the reality with which pretty much all Black people live to this day. I know that there is a lot of sort of discussion about, well, we're still holding people responsible for what happened hundreds of years ago with regards to slavery, and slaves have been freed, but even in my lifetime, we really weren't. I mean, once slavery was abolished, then there were Jim Crow laws, which stayed in effect for a very long time until there was the Civil Rights Act and things like that. That happened during my lifetime. And I don't really think that I'm that old that we should discount it. It's still here. Interestingly enough, when we look at sort of the whole climate now with elections and voter suppression, the Voting Rights Act is up for reauthorization. And I've been thinking a lot about that in these past few weeks. What's going to happen if it's not reauthorized? What does that mean for people of color in their right to exercise their vote? I'm not sure, but it's of concern to me.
Well, it's of concern to a lot of people, and the concerns that have really driven some of the work that you're doing, some of the work we're doing together include policing, but really are an attempt to deal with racial disparities wherever they exist in the criminal justice system. And of course, we know they don't stop and start with the criminal justice system either, that even if there is a special opportunity right now to focus on policing and focus on the criminal justice system overall, we know there are disparities in education and in healthcare and in economic opportunities. So there is a lot of work yet to be done. And maybe the solution rests on the foundation of what we discussed before, and that is treating everyone with dignity and respect, and assigning a worth to them that is equivalent to the worth of every other person. When you were formally installed as the president judge, one of your colleagues, Judge Kim Eaton, who now heads the family division and who once was my student, said that because of your efforts, the juvenile justice system in Allegheny County was now considered to be the gold standard. And that's a well-deserved, but it's got to be a heartening comment. And as we look at the criminal justice system in Allegheny County, we know there has been progress. There is a foundation to build on. But I think we also recognize that there is a distance to travel. So I want to thank you for everything you have contributed to the health and strength of our region already. I want to wish you the best as you move forward in your still relatively new position as president judge to tackle some of the problems that continue to exist. And obviously, I want to thank you for taking time to be with us today to discuss these issues.
Thanks for inviting me. And I look forward to continued collaboration with you and with others, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you.